Welcome to Your Future Starts Now, the go-to podcast for extraordinary women who are ready to step into their next chapter with authentic confidence. I'm your host, Gia Lacqua, empowerment coach, motivational speaker, children's book author, and girl mom. Whether you're a corporate powerhouse or an entrepreneur, this show is designed for you. Your Future Starts Now is more than just a podcast. It's a movement towards rewriting the rules of success for high-achieving women. Are you ready to get unstuck and step into your next chapter? If so, you're exactly where you need to be. Your future starts now. Welcome to Your Future Starts Now. I'm your host, Gia Lacqua. I want to thank you for joining us. Today, I'm thrilled to welcome back to the show, Kristen Radke. Kristen is a highly experienced, respected clinical therapist based in Arizona. With extensive experience providing counseling to individuals, couples, and families, Kristen uses modern therapeutic techniques combined with biblical wisdom to help clients heal from anxiety, depression, relationship conflicts, and shame. Backed by popular demand, Kristen, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be back.
So last time you and I talked about taming the busy mind and this concept of high functioning anxiety, and it really seemed to resonate with our audience. So I thought today we could follow up and go a little bit deeper on the topics of anxiety, trauma, and high performing women.
Okay.
So talk to us a little bit when you have women that present or clients that present in your practice who have experienced trauma. How do you explain the concept of trauma to them?
Yeah. So oftentimes when clients come in, and I'm specifically going to talk about the clients that don't know that they experienced trauma, like they know that something was difficult that happened in their life. They know that they're not feeling great. They can't necessarily explain those symptoms, but they're coming into counseling and they're like, hey, I'm a little more anxious. I'm experiencing panic attacks, and they're explaining these different symptoms. One of the things that we do first is we talk about the neurobiology of trauma, because I want them to understand the symptoms that they're experiencing has a root cause. And the root cause is that connection between the mind and what they experienced and their nervous system. So one of the things that we start with is we talk about the nervous system specifically and the difference between what we call the parasympathetic, which is your rest and digest. That's your really calming part of your nervous system. And the sympathetic nervous system, which is what we call fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, right? And so that's going to be where we start explaining the differences between the two, as well as the connection with the brain. And what I often find when I'm explaining these things to clients is that they are like, yeah, that explains so many, they're like checking off things like that explains how I felt here. That explains what happened here. And they're amazed that this is all rooted in a traumatic experience that is, stored in their, not only in their brains, but also in their bodies.
Wow. So interesting. And I do want to talk more about the nervous system regulation and how trauma manifests, not just emotionally and psychologically, but physically and physiologically as well. First, I want to just go back to something you said about when your clients present, they maybe don't know the full extent of the trauma that they experienced. And I think that tends to be very common amongst high-performing women in the sense that, even personally, from personal experience, I know cognitively I told myself, yes, I've dealt with these things and I've checked them off of my list. And it wasn't really until I started EMDR that I realized the full extent of, there's levels of healing that need to happen. And so I was curious if you could expand upon your experience with that.
Yeah, I think that a lot of people, especially more in the high achieving kind of perfectionistic realm, because the fact that perfectionism is as a result of like trying to outrun shame, they're using things like intellectualizing as a defense mechanism. So they know that they went through something, but they're also like, yeah, but like, it's fine. Like, yeah, I got through it. We're okay now. Because they don't want to sit with the feelings that come with healing, right? Because they're like, okay, we need to, in order to outrun shame, I have to perform, but I can't perform if I have to sit with the grief of my experience. And so I think that a lot of times I have to slow those people down and go, hey, like, we need to really, like, let me just repeat back to you what you just told me about your experience. Let me just tell you, I know you said it this way, but let me just tell you what happened. And they're like, yeah, no, I know. And we have to slow down and we have to go back and, hey, let me tell. And I don't do that so that they can blame other people and get really mad and break off all these relationships. I tell them that because I need them to start to break down that defense mechanism of intellectualizing and really sit with their experience. Because oftentimes when they do that, they realize, wow, I need to grieve what I did not have. I need to grieve the childhood that I wasn't allowed to, the innocence that I lost.
Yeah.
And that can be really powerful, but it's hard, especially with high achieving women, because they are on the go. Let's heal. All right, check. We've healed. We're moving on, and healing and emotional healing is not like that.
It's not. And I love the way you said that. And it is a lifelong journey in my experience, professionally and personally. But, I guess it's a good question is, can we hold space for being high achieving and hold the space for the feelings of shame and blame that come up, as we're going through that healing journey?
Yeah. And I think just being able to recognize you can hold two feelings at the same time, even if those feelings are competing, right? So I can hold the grief of what I didn't have, at the same time of being grateful for where I am. And you can hold both, and you can hold the feelings of working through what this means about your relationship with the person or persons who maybe were abusive or whatever that experience was. At the same time, you can also be processing through, maybe I still want to have a relationship with this person, but maybe it might look different. But you're kind of holding space for all these different emotions. It's difficult. And I think that's why therapy can be so helpful, is because it's a non-judgmental space where people can process through these things. But I think it's so key. It's so key to be able to have a space where you can sit down and hold these really heavy emotions and process through these emotions with someone.
Yeah, that makes sense. And are there specific types of trauma in your experience that are more strongly associated with anxiety?
That's a really good question. I would say in my experience, I've seen trauma that has to do with the body more highly associated with anxiety. So we're talking about physical trauma, sexual trauma, domestic violence. These are the ones that I find, because of the connection between the mind and the body. I find those to be the ones that you really have to sit with more, process through more in order to heal from, because of that mind-body connection and how it can impact you, not just emotionally, but on a nervous system level. And there's a book sitting up here. It's called The Body Keeps the Score. And it's something I highly recommend to people who have gone through any type of trauma. But he talks about Bessel van der Kolk, who's one of the leading psychologists in trauma. He talks about this connection and how the body stores the memories of trauma. And so you may think that you've intellectualizing, that you've processed through it, but there's a deeper level and there's a deeper layer that's stored in our bodies that we need to be able to emotionally process through and grieve.
Yeah. It's such a powerful point. And I think it takes a lot of introspection and self-reflection and awareness of that mind-body connection. And I think that's where the support of having, a therapist or a trauma-informed coach can really support you through that process.
Yeah.
And so just going back to the nervous system regulation piece and, how trauma impacts high-performing women, what I want to talk about just is, how does it impact high-performing women differently? Like, why is it unique? So in my practice, a lot of times I see clients who similarly have, the low energy, the anxious feelings, the perfectionistic tendencies. They're always on edge.
extremely overwhelmed, not sleeping well. So in your experience, I'm curious as to what's the differentiating factor.
In my experience, I think high performing women, or men, but in this case, women, I think that it's actually more challenging for them to work through trauma than somebody who's not high performing, at least from what I've seen. Because oftentimes when someone comes in who's maybe they're just, struggling through life and they've really just struggled in general, I feel like they're a little bit more in tune with those emotions. They're a little bit more in tune with what their body's experiencing. And when you get someone who's high performing to sit down and you have to work through a lot of defense mechanisms, and you have to work through a lot of walls that are protecting them from experiencing and feeling that shame. And obviously the shame is not really something that they need to own, but it's something that they feel. And so we have to help them kind of work through that and start to believe something different about the shame, which we can talk about in a minute. But and then once you work through that, then we help them connect to their body. But all of that brings a lot of emotions up. So I think it's more challenging because there's a lot more protective factors and protective walls that are up with women who are very successful, who've been kind of running from these feelings for a long time.
Yeah, it's a great point. I can speak from personal experience. The walls that we put up and the defensive mechanisms are real, and it does take a lot of support to bring those down, and trust and work to bring them down, and obviously getting to the core, right, of those underlying feelings is really critical. So when we talk about, going back to the shame piece, when we talk about trauma, behind the trauma, there is some form, to your point, of shame, blame, or guilt, or a combination of the three. So, and that's hard, right? That's hard for anybody to acknowledge and accept, especially for high performing women who are used to being at the top of their game and the appearance of being perfect, right? To then open that door just a crack, and for those words to even be introduced, right, can be overwhelming for people. But I think it's important to understand the shame piece of it. So can you elaborate on that a bit?
Yeah, I think so. And I'm an attachment theory therapist. So basically everything I believe, a lot of this, is rooted in those initial developmental years, right? So infancy lasts for 3 years. And then after that, everything, those developmental years are so important because it establishes what you believe about yourself, what you believe about the world. Is the world trustworthy? Is it not? Is it safe? Is it unsafe? It establishes what you feel about people in authority, right? Are caregivers going to meet your needs or not meet your needs?
Yeah.
What does that look like? Can you trust other people? All of this is established in those early developmental years. So typically people that experience shame, right, they experience some form. It could be abuse or neglect. It could be physical and all of those things. It could also even just be that you needed something, and the need that you had was either minimized, or it was downplayed, or it was outright denied. And so it could be something along the lines of, you had a need as a child. This is obviously repetitive. So it was a need over and over again that you were told, you're fine, you're okay, stop crying, you're good. So that minimizing and that denying, which, again, a lot of parents follow the parenting recommendations of their day and their generation. But if that's denied again and again, you start to believe there's something wrong with you because you continue to have this need, whatever that need is.
Yeah.
It could be physical comfort. It could be emotional comfort. It could be the basics of life, right? So food and all of that. But a lot of times I see this in people who needed emotional connection with a parent, and they were denied that emotional connection. And as a result of that, they start to believe that they are bad because children don't have the ability to process differently. Everything, they're egocentric, right? And so everything has to do with them. So if their parents get divorced, it's their fault. If a parent denies them something emotional, it's their fault. So they start to believe, well, there's something wrong with me. And that becomes that thought process of, I'm not good enough, which then leads to there's something wrong with me, and then there's shame. And that feeling of shame is not something that we're very good at processing through or working through as people. So then we have one of a couple solutions. Either we believe that and we kind of lie down in that puddle of shame, or we try to outrun it. And we go, well, if I'm not good enough, maybe if I perform better, I will be good enough. And that usually in childhood leads to some of this perfectionism, outperforming, high functioning women.
Yeah, there's so much power in what you just said. And two things I just want to call out. So one is proving your worth, right? So if our self-worth at its core, if we are not strong in our own self-worth, then we're constantly trying to prove ourselves. And I think for so many of us who have experienced childhood trauma, that is a recurring theme until you're able to really break that cycle and heal that underlying shame. So super powerful point. The other thing I want to just call out as you were talking, and it's true, a lot of us as children were told you can't feel certain emotions, or no, you're fine, you're safe, you're okay, stop complaining.
Yeah.
Where we started this conversation was women intellectualizing our trauma and downplaying our trauma. And whose voice is that we are playing in our head when we're telling ourselves it's fine. It's not a big deal.
Yeah.
Right. And so I'm constantly reading, information about how as parents, our voice becomes their inner voice.
Yes.
So
100%.
That is so powerful.
Yeah. 100%. I think it's hard because you have people, and I understand intellectually what people were trying to do.
Sure.
But it's really damaging. It's really damaging because just because you validate a child's experience and you comfort them, it's not going to turn them into somebody who is not strong and independent and able to take care of themselves. And for some reason, there's this lie, this myth that says that it's coddling and you're going to turn this kid into like a puddle of dependence. And that's just not true. You actually see quite the opposite, that the kids that receive more of that secure attachment in those early developmental years, they're actually more independent. They do better. They have an easier time, going into classrooms and schools and things like that, because they have this secure anchor to go back to. Yeah. They know their parents there. They know that they're loved. They know that they have a place to go home to. And things are dependable and they're reliable. And so this myth of don't comfort them, tell them that they're fine so they'll be strong is just so damaging.
Yeah. And many of us carry that through adulthood, right? This concept of having to be stoic and having to be strong and not allowing ourselves to feel those big, quote unquote, ugly emotions when they come up.
Right. And so my question is, okay, so you're going to basically cut off that emotional spectrum that you have. And then you expect your child to be able to handle all of the spectrum of their emotions. They're not seeing you handle them.
Right.
They're seeing no emotions, or they're seeing frustration or anger, which is obviously a secondary emotion. And so I just think, it's so much better for us to model how do we handle emotions in a healthy way. How do we heal from things in a healthy way? How do we help them process through their big emotions that they don't know how to handle yet? Something I'm very conscious of as a therapist, but as a parent. Yeah. So,
of course.
Yeah.
It's a great point. I think, as you mentioned, the generational parenting concepts, I think we've evolved, which is great to see. There's sort of new ways of thinking about parenting and emotional support and attachment, which I think is much healthier. And I think there's still room to go. So while we're on the topic of the inner child, Kristen, I'm curious, we talk a lot about, as women, I hear a lot about imposter syndrome, and there's different theories on it and there's different ways to approach it. I want to look at this from a little bit of a unique lens that you and I sort of both share, which is how imposter syndrome can be more than just feeling like you're not enough in a professional capacity.
Mm-hmm.
Because I was having a conversation with a beautiful woman this morning who is an author, and we were talking about an experience of, being a corporate woman in a boardroom and not just feeling like you're not good enough to be there, but this feeling of that inner child is the one who's sitting in that chair feeling not enough, which I think is more prevalent than we talk about. So I would love your perspective on that.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many directions I could take that. I mean, we could even go into more IFS and the parts of yourself and all of that. But I would say, imposter syndrome, again, I think if we go back to this idea of shame and the fact that, we show up in these rooms and we feel like we're not enough, or we don't belong there. We're not good enough for these rooms. Those beliefs are rooted in that belief of shame. I'm not good enough. It's rooted. It all goes back to that. It all goes back to the fact that it's not just that I'm a professional and I'm learning how to handle my own in this profession. It's that I have had this, this negative core belief since I was a child, that any room I walk into, where there are authority figures that remind me of parents or remind me of just other people that are better than me, right? Because that comparison starts early on, that I start to feel that imposter syndrome. I start to feel like I'm not good enough. I don't belong here. And then you're trying to outperform that, right? Because you're like, okay, well, there's that feeling of shame again. Like I need to outperform. Okay, so now I'm going to overcompensate for the fact that I feel like I don't belong here. And I think that often, it's not that it's obvious, but it's also something clearly that, if that's what your experience is, that's something you need to process through.
Yeah.
Because it's not true. Like it's not that you're not good enough for that room. It's that you've had this belief for a very long time, and your brain has believed this one path, this one thought. And it's all the way, stored in that body of yours. And so you have to work through the layers of that so that you are able to walk in and go, no, it's not that I'm better than anyone here, but I belong here. Like I have something to offer. And getting from that point of imposter to knowing that I have a place at the table and I have something to offer, it takes time and it takes healing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great point. And it is much deeper than I think what we typically talk about, right? When people refer to imposter syndrome, I think it's sort of on a different level.
Yeah.
It certainly doesn't apply to everybody, but I think there's probably a good percentage of people that that relate to exactly what you're saying. So around that self-worth piece and the shame piece, if people listening do have that experience and have that coming up for them, obviously therapy is a great place to start. What other tips, tools, or advice would you give to high performing women or anyone listening who has struggled with trauma related anxiety and they're looking for support on their healing journey?
Yeah. I think for clients that I work with, the first thing that we need to understand is the connection between the traumatic memories and the experiences that you had and what your body is physiologically doing right now. A lot of times anxiety can come from unresolved trauma, because what's happening is your body's been telling you for a long time, something's up, hey, something's up, emotionally. And maybe even physically, right? Different symptoms of anxiety or panic.
Yep.
And then it gets to a point where you can no longer ignore it.
Yep.
And your body's like, dude, you need to deal with this, and you need to deal with it now. And this is when, I usually see people because they're like, well, it wasn't that bad. And then it got worse. And then I ended up in the ER and I thought I was having a heart attack.
Yeah.
And then now I'm here.
Mm-hmm.
And that's usually when we go, okay, the very first thing we're going to do is we are going to work on helping you regulate your nervous system.
Yeah.
Before we get into all the thought work, before we get into the past work about your childhood trauma, before we process through anything emotionally, you have to have stability. And the stability that you have is understanding the connection between your sympathetic nervous system, fight or flight, and your parasympathetic nervous system, rest and digest. And the connection there is that they are opposing systems, which means that one of them, if one of them is on, the other one's off. They can never be on at the same time. So the beauty of that is that if you learn how to activate your parasympathetic nervous system, then you will know how to get out of fight or flight. The problem is the connection between your, when your sympathetic nervous system is on, when fight or flight is on, you lose access to your prefrontal cortex,
Mm-hmm.
which is the part of your brain that has logical thinking, right? So this is when people come in and they're like, I have no idea why I did that. I don't know why I couldn't. Or here's one. If you've been a victim of crime, someone attacked you, someone assaulted you, and you're like, why didn't I fight?
Mm.
What I will tell you is you couldn't have fought because your body did what it knew how to do because it wasn't connecting to the logical thinking part of your brain. You didn't sit there and go, what should I do here? You can't, because historically speaking, your body was created this way so that you could react quickly. So you could flee, so you could freeze, so you could fight, right? And so your body reacted the way that it did because that's how your body was designed. So what we talk about is okay, you don't have logical thinking when you're in your sympathetic nervous system. So what you need to learn how to do is you need to repeat the things that activate your parasympathetic nervous system.
Mm-hmm.
And you need to repeat them often so that so it becomes kind of this muscle memory thing of when my body goes here and I'm safe, I'm going to do the things that I know how to do to get my body back into my parasympathetic nervous system.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times clients will come in and they're like, yeah, but I've done the breathing thing and that doesn't work. And that's when I say, well, I think that you probably haven't learned how to do the breathing thing, because the parasympathetic nervous system is directly linked to your exhale breath. So learning how to breathe properly, not hyperventilating, not breathing a bunch, but learning how to breathe properly will get you out of fight or flight. It will. It'll relax your body, because you cannot be in fight or flight in a relaxed body.
Mm-hmm.
When your muscles are relaxed, you are out of fight or flight. So we start there.
Yeah, I love that. It's so beautifully stated. And, you mentioned this concept of not feeling not safe. And I think oftentimes, again, intellectually, we can tell ourselves we're safe, right, in our environment, and look around and logically say, there's nothing, I'm not in any line of threat or danger. Yet there's this script running in the background telling us, the amygdala is going off, right? Saying, nope, we're not safe. We're not safe. And it's like, well, what is that alarm in your body? And how do we get to the root of it, right? Because again, I can intellectualize all day, but it's not going to make that alarm go off. And so I think those are some really great points.
Yeah. And what's interesting about that is that trauma is stored in the body, but it's also stored in the senses. So if there's anything that resembles the past, so let's say that there was someone who abused this client, and there's a smell, there's a cologne or a perfume or something that's triggering to them, and they walk into a Sephora and they smell it. Their body's not going to differentiate that person isn't here. They're just going to go into fight or flight because the body stores all of those warning signs in the senses.
Yeah. As a memory, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so I'm not going to get into all the different parts of the brain, but there's a part in your brain where basically it's scanning for those things, and it's saying, okay, are we safe? Are we good? And when it sees something, there's two different pathways that it will take. But if there's a danger, it will take the quickest pathway to your amygdala. It will sound that emergency alarm, and now your body's in fight or flight.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's so critical to understand those stored memories and that mind-body connection. I love that.
Right. And that's why people, in therapy or, wherever else, they need to understand the triggers. And that's why we work on triggers, is because we're reteaching the brain that you're safe. But it takes time. It takes time for the brain to unlearn something that it was doing to keep you safe.
Yeah, for sure. And I can also speak from personal experience that sometimes you don't even realize what the triggers are, right? And your body is just reacting. And then one day you're like, oh, that's why I have such a strong reaction to that. So first is really just the awareness around identifying what those triggers are for you, and then unpacking kind of where that comes from, and then redirecting that reaction. So great advice. Kristen, I know you're also a certified yoga instructor. Do you want to talk to us a little bit about somatic yoga?
Oh, somatic yoga. So basically, I got certified back in 2016, and I just love learning new things to be able to help with regulating that nervous system. And one of the things that I love about doing yoga, or really we could even just say like breath with movement, if you, don't like yoga, but basically is when you experience trauma, when you experience these difficult memories and they're stored in the body, one of the things that you might find is that doing these types of movements with your breath, one, you are slowing down your breath. So you are intentionally getting into your parasympathetic nervous system, which for women, high functioning women who are typically in sympathetic nervous system dominance, this is really good because you want time where you can slow down and get out of that fight or flight experience, right? So this forces you to do that. You have to slow down your breath. You're breathing in, sometimes in and out the nose. You're breathing in the nose, out the mouth, however your instructor is guiding it. But then you're also moving. And so what sometimes you might find is that you might actually have emotions come up while you're doing yoga. And, I'll hear different experiences about which emotions. It could be anger. It could actually be sadness. And those emotions, those emotional releases, as I call them, it's really healthy. You may not even realize what you're releasing, but your body, in order to heal from trauma, you have to release things on an emotional level. Something happened. If you didn't release it back then, you have to release it now.
Yeah.
And so being able to move your body with the breath, get into that calm state, allows your body to be calm enough and safe enough to release these emotions and start even healing from things that you didn't even realize. And so, I even had an experience like that. And there was a moment where I knew what I was releasing, and I released that, and the teacher that I was with held space for that. It was great, and nothing was weird. And I think it's just really healthy to be able to find the things that help you to regulate that nervous system, help you to slow down, help you to feel like you can release things on an emotional level. And the experience, I think, for a lot of people is that they don't know how to slow down enough to get to that point, or they don't know how to create space for that. And so why yoga sometimes is helpful, even like vinyasa, just the typical yoga classes that you would go to, is that by busying the body, sometimes it quiets the mind. So it even kind of brings down some of those intellectual defenses, because we're like, I'm not thinking about all this, how do I keep these walls up? I'm thinking about, where am I putting my foot right now? And am I breathing still? And so that allows your body to kind of go, okay, we can release some things right now because you're not overthinking this whole process. So it's one of the things that I've recommended for some clients in the past is to do that, because I think it's helped them bring down some of those defenses and have a safe place where they can release some emotional things.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. I think the breath with movement is a beautiful way of saying it. And it's really about finding what works for you, right?
Yeah.
And what you feel comfortable with, and finding that safe space for you where you can down regulate and process. So I love that. Kristen, remind our listeners where they can learn more about you and the work that you do.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can find me on my website, kristenradke.com. You can follow me on Instagram, Therapy with Chris. And those are probably the two best places to find me right now.
Perfect. Kristen, thank you so much for being here, for sharing your insights and expertise. This was such a fascinating conversation. I loved it. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
And of course, you can visit my website at gialacqua.com, reach out on Instagram at gialacqua, and don't forget to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. This is Gia signing off with gratitude for your time and energy. Our mic drops, but the movement continues. Until next time, your next chapter is waiting. Take care.
That concludes another empowering episode of Your Future Starts Now. Before we wrap up, I want to thank this incredible community of high-achieving women. Your energy, resilience, and commitment to growth are the driving force behind what we do. If you enjoyed today's episode, please rate it, leave a review, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Your feedback fuels our mission to empower high-achieving women just like you. And of course, share Your Future Starts Now with the extraordinary women in your life who are also on a journey of healing and empowerment. Connect with us on social media, share your thoughts, let us know what topics you'd like to explore in future episodes. Stay connected on Instagram at gialacqua. I encourage you to carry the energy of this conversation into your day and keep on supporting the incredible women around you. Until next time, remember, your next chapter is waiting.